China is a very interesting country from which there is a lot of things to learn. But she's also a danger to the continent if we are not careful. What is there to learn from China? The thing to learn from China is that during our lifetime, the Chinese, through their ingenuity, have succeeded in lifting nearly 800 million people out of poverty. What did the Chinese do? Is there something that we can learn from them? I think there is. Those of you who have the advantage and the privilege of serving in government, ask yourself, what did the Chinese do that within our own lifetime they succeeded in doing that? And they are everywhere, the Chinese. They know what they want. I think the first thing that you must do, you must know what you want. You know, last year I was sitting and watching a Chinese news channel, and if you want to understand what others who are potentially your friends and enemies are doing, you must listen to their news. I was watching the CGTN, and I was listening to the 6,000 delegates in China sitting and thinking about China, how China will deal with Africa and the world 100 years from thence. The people who are there will not be alive. In many African countries, if you tell them to think about what will happen tomorrow, they say only God knows. No. I hold the view that when you are planning, you plan as if you will never die. And if you are prayerful, you pray as if you'll die the next minute. I'm suggesting that the Chinese have given us away. Today, the Chinese, and see how the Chinese are working with us. Which university in Africa worth its name does not have a Confucius Center? I do not know whether you have one here at UCC. Why do the Chinese have a Confucius Center? Because the mind is the standard of the man. Once you influence the mind, you can sit pretty because you can predict what the man will do. How many of you who are the middle class today, in addition to asking your children to read French and Germany, are now asking and encouraging their children, go ye and learn Mandarin? How many of you? Confucius Center to work on your mind. On our mind. And then, how many countries in Africa don't you find a stadium built by Chinese? And if it is not a stadium, it is your state house. And if it is not the state house, it's the African headquarters. And if it is not the African headquarters, is infrastructure, is the road or the railway. And if it is not the railway, it is 4 lorries. And if it is not those, in the next 10 years, out of every 10 phones used by you will be Chinese. If it is not Techno, it is Infinix. If it is not Infinix, it's Huawei. No African country produces a phone. None. It's only Rwanda that is beginning to assemble some. There is something to admire about the Chinese. But if we want to benefit from the Chinese, we must be strong. We must be weak. We must not be weak. We must negotiate continentally. The Koreans are also small but strong. But if we are not careful, and I'm saying this, if we are not careful, in the next 25 years, all of us will be speaking Mandarin. If we are not careful, if we are not careful, because the Chinese here are not here for charity. The Chinese are here to do business. And in the world of business, it is a cruel world where throats are literally cut. I'm reading a small book written by a young Chinese girl called Irene Yuan Sun, The Next Factory of the World. And the young Chinese girl is saying exactly what I'm saying. He says that Africa can benefit from China. Africa can be the next factory of the world. But it's not just going to happen. Something must be done about it, which is what brings me to the last segment of my conversation, Africa Agenda 2063. I remember on that day in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Nkosazana and Lamini Zuma, the then chairman of the Organization of the African Union, writing and reading an imaginary letter to Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. I will not remember the words exactly, but I'll remember it in substance. And in substance, he was saying, by the year 2063, we Africans, having recognized that we may have lost the last 50 years of our independence, will not lose the next 50 years of our independence. I'm adding a few things in order to make it relevant. But she was saying, in effect, the Osagyefo, in the year 2063, Africa will be different. There'll be an electric rail running from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to Dakar in Senegal. In the year 2063, Africa will be feeding herself, and the bread basket of Africa will be Zimbabwe in Southern Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Africa will be making her own furniture, and we will do so in a sustainable manner, with the equatorial forests of Congo being the source of our products. I will remember in those years to come, what you now see as the Sahara Desert will have been greened. Africa will be covered in forests. The Democratic Republic of Congo will become the equivalent of the Silicon Valley. There will be rare earth. Africa will use funds made by Africans. Africa will refine their own oil. Africa will use our own copper. Africa will have excess electricity. Africa will have the Inga Dam in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Africa will have built the Grand Renaissance Dam, and indeed at that time Sudan will not quarrel with Ethiopia, and Egypt will not quarrel with Ethiopia. They will be using these resources well. Africa will not be importing fish, tilapia from China. The fish will be produced in Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Tana, and all these other places. That was the reason of Africa Agenda 2063. It was a dream. But is it not true that we must all dream? We must dream. The only thing that we must do once we have dreamt, we must wake up. The problem is sometimes we dream and we don't wake up. We must wake up and now begin to implement. Do I think that Africa woke up? I think Africa woke up. And that is how I understand the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a demonstration that beyond dreaming in a very amorphous manner, we now want to give form and character to our dream by operationalization, so that we begin to bring down the tariff and non-tariff barriers, so that we are able to ensure that Africa will do things that will make Africa great. Intra-African trade will be 80%. And that is why it gladdens my heart that Accra, Ghana was chosen to be the secretariat of the ACTF. I look forward to the day when the protocols are now being made, that we shall begin to take advantage of innovation. You remember Africa lost out in the first industrial revolution. Africa lost out in the second industrial revolution. Africa has started gaining a little from the third industrial revolution. We are now in the fourth industrial revolution, where we are talking about artificial intelligence, we are talking about robotics, we are talking about the Internet of Things. We are saying that Africa must now find her pride of place in those areas, so that Africa can be great in agriculture, Africa can be great in education, Africa can be great in value addition, Africa can be great in utilizing our fossil fuels, so that young Africans will not cross the Mediterranean Sea. When I look at Africa, I think that she can be made to work, but the last thing that we must do is to ensure that we introduce hygiene in our politics. Because it all begins and ends with leadership. History has demonstrated, not once, not twice, but times without number, that when you have men and women who are good leaders and they know what they want, they can catapult their countries within a short time into the higher orbits of development. We must now begin to ask ourselves, how do we govern ourselves? How do we create a political environment where all these things can happen? I'm suggesting to us, without being arrogant, and speaking hopefully with the humility that will not sharpen the anger of leaders in this forum, but will open their eyes. When you are in a position of honor and privilege, remember that your duty is to serve. Those of you who are cabinet ministers, remember that you are not necessarily the best of men, but you've been favored to be in positions of honor and privilege. You are not necessarily the best of women. Because you have been honored and privileged, serve in humility. And the problem in Africa is that many African leaders suffer from what I call the Jehovah complex. The Jehovah complex is a belief by those in leadership that they have the monopoly of wisdom and they have the monopoly of knowledge. That is not the route. Africa will be great when her leaders begin to know that they have a duty to serve, so that the future generation will be able to make Africa great again. Africa can be great. Africa will be great. Africa will be great in agriculture. Africa will be great in our industries. Africa will be great in our education. Africa will be great in all other things. But the last thing that Africans must do is to decolonize our minds. We must liberate ourselves from this misguided view that we cannot achieve. We can achieve, we have achieved, and going forward, working together, we will achieve. God bless.